So, well, thanks very much. Great turnout here today. Very excited to see so many people interested in hearing about storytelling. So I'm going to give you a kind of sheep dip version of what storytelling is all about. I've got a very limited amount of time, and there's a lot that you can learn in this area. And for those of you that are interested in learning some more, I would point you in the direction of some of the TED Talks that talk specifically about storytelling, and there is a whole playlist that they make available where I learned some of my skills and techniques from around this idea. So, let's talk a little bit about what storytelling isn't. Storytelling is not the usual corporate blah, blah, blah that everybody puts out. So some of the words on these slides you will probably be familiar with, right? Traditional corporate messaging is, let's be honest, pretty boring. Everybody's a leader, right? There's so much leadership in the world, you would wonder whether, there's got to be some businesses out there that aren't leading, but supposedly everybody's a leader. So it's pretty boring, right? It's pretty jargon-ridden, because we all like to use our acronyms, whether our customers know them or not. We tend to be quite inward. It's all about us, right? We want to talk about our message that we want to tell our customers, not the message our customers want to hear necessarily. It tends to be just a set of words. I'm just going to talk at you rather than actually engage with you. And it tends to be pretty mundane and dull and boring. You can see the words on the slides. I'm not going to read them out. But the difference with storytelling is about delivering an emotional connection with the audience that's there. The first thing to really recognize is that you're not just sharing the story you want to tell. You really need to try and fine-tune that story to the audience that's there. And one could argue today that here I am from Travelport, I should be selling you on Travelport. But actually what I'm doing is telling you something that I'm hoping that you're going to take away from this message, from this conversation, and actually think, you know what, I learned something today from somebody at Travelport, and it wasn't just a message that they were broadcasting at me for just their purposes. Now, I will be sharing some of the Travelport story with you to illustrate the technique, so hopefully you'll forgive me that small amount of sales plugging that I will be doing during my conversation. So hopefully, with some of the words on here, you can see the difference between a traditional corporate message and what storytelling is trying to allude to. So why do we use stories? So I'm guessing everybody in this room will know what that story is. And even though we have many different geographies in this room, most people will know the story of Red Riding Hood. It's a kind of unilateral story that crosses international boundaries. Now, why do we tell stories about Little Red Riding Hood? Well, it's actually to try and prevent our children running off with strangers. It's about them trying to not get abused, for example. Not nice subjects, to be honest. So why do we use stories? Well, we can wrap that up in a nice little compact message, and we can deliver it to people. And so we can take a message that is probably something that's not particularly digestible to a young child, and we can give it to them in a format that allows them to A, understand it, B, internalize it, and share it with their friends and colleagues. We've all heard great ghost stories, right? I could almost guarantee I could go around the room and ask somebody to tell a ghost story, and somebody would have some really good ones, right? Again, these are the kind of stories that when you hear them, they captivate you and they pull you in. You want to hear the next part of the story. And again, the storytelling technique is about engaging with people at a deeper, more emotional level. And of course, cavemen have been around for thousands of years telling their stories using imagery to tell a story. So the secret to this approach is first and foremost figuring out how do I tell messages that are about people and about places. If you want to build an emotional connection with your customers, And let's be honest, we all do, because for all the facts, figures, leadership points, you don't buy from somebody that you don't trust and believe in. And so, as much as we are creatures of logic, we're also creatures of emotion. And storytelling is about figuring out how you put people, places, narrative into the messages that you're delivering about your brand, about your products, about your solutions. And there are many, many examples in business that we can use to tell stories. You could tell stories about why you work for the company you work for. Or you could tell stories about the vision that your business has, and that could be a reason that you want to tell a story to your customers. Most good brands will have a purpose. They'll have a set of values. They'll have a set of a vision of some kind. All of those are elements that you can use to deliver great stories. So Aristotle, on the right side here, talked about 3 kinds of ways of communicating. The first was using logic. And most businesses major up on the logic, right? It's all about leadership. It's all about the 200 things that your product does. It's all about the facts and figures that you can throw in to your messaging to overwhelm your customers with why, logically, you are the best solution for them. But there's also the idea of pathos, which is about emotion. Building an emotional connection with your customers is something that actually often drives much more purchasing decision-making than you might think. And I'm going to put some examples on a slide in a moment, and I'm going to ask some of you to raise your hand to admit to being driven by emotion, maybe rather than logic. And finally, the third area is around ethics. Now, in today's society, we increasingly talk about ethical businesses. Big businesses in Silicon Valley always have these bigger purposes for why they do what they do. And again, part of this is to deliver a meaningful narrative to customers that makes it greater than the individual pieces of the messaging they deliver. And I'll tell you a company that does this really, really well today. If you look on YouTube, when Airbnb launched their Trips product, there's a short 2.5-minute video on there, and they do a really good job of telling a story in the way that they launched that product. So if you're looking for what good looks like, that's a really good example to go and take a look at. Now, some of you may be familiar with a book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And I've stolen the golden circle from his book. But the golden circle relates the limbic brain, and this is where neuroscience plays into this, so there is some science and logic behind why we act like this, and the neocortex, which is that bit that looks like a walnut. And the logical thinking part of our brain is all in that neocortex piece. But the reason we generally make a decision to buy, the reason we commit to a brand, the reason we choose to actually engage with customers, the reason we buy from somebody because we feel a trust with them, is all about the limbic brain. And this is about the how and the why. It is not about the what. Now, some of you are sitting there going, I don't believe a word he's saying. It's all about logic. I only make logical decisions. I'm German. I'm efficient. I do these things in this way. But in actual fact, if any of these brands on this screen mean anything to you, you probably are making decisions on a more emotional level. Let's be honest. Ladies and men in the room who may own a pair of Gucci shoes or some other major designer brand, want to raise your hand? Anybody brave enough? I know you're out there. The reality is there's just as much leather in those shoes as there is in a non-fashion brand. But for some reason, you have emotionally decided that that is something that's important to you. Just in the same way, many of you will be fans of Apple, as am I. But the circuitry that goes into those devices is exactly the same circuitry that goes into the other devices. Yes, they're designed by a company in California, but the reality is the raw materials, the silicon, the plastic, the glass, it's the same. And Apple are a brilliant company at telling stories. If you look at most of their advertising, it's not featuring the product, it's about the story, it's about the people, it's about the emotional connections that their devices are enabling. And of course, British Airways, a major brand that charges a premium for some of their flights, and I'm just using it as an example. There are many examples of other airlines and others that do that. So, I'm going to give you the whistle-top tour of what is a story. Now, if you watch Hollywood films, pretty much 90% of the Hollywood films, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's Disney, whether it's the Marvel comics, whatever your preferred films are, follow this 7-point story arc. And they start with the idea of the hook. And the hook is the thing that you want to do to get somebody interested. So for those of you that have seen Harry Potter, sure of you will remember the original film, the hook was this boy that lived under a staircase. Initially, we didn't know he was a wizard. He was just living under a staircase, which was a kind of weird thing, and we're thinking, what's going on here? The plot turn, however, was when we started to learn that he was a wizard. We then have a pinch, which generally is something that's uncomfortable, that pushes people outside of their comfort zone. We have a tipping point where the story has probably been quite negative and bad, and then it starts to move to a more happy point. A second pinch, or a climax to the story, and then finally the resolution, where everything goes back to normal. And we know whether it's Lord of the Rings or any big blockbuster, this is the flow that goes through that. And so, to give you a little bit of extra info, it's really about understanding how you apply this idea of the emotional connection, the people, with the other pieces. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to take you through Travelport's current story, which I created through last year, and I'm going to highlight the sections to you within this so that you can see how this is applied in a real business environment. So, the first piece is the hook. So, many of us know today that mobile is this new phenomenon, okay? On average, in the US, people spend 1 hour and 56 minutes per day on their mobile devices. These mobile devices are connected 24/7, and through the likes of social networks, allow people to communicate globally. What this means is that travelers are more powerful than ever. We've pretty much got mini film recording studios in our pockets. And any of you that have seen a certain airline brand pulling their customers off a flight and the YouTube video that incurred off the back of that, know that your travel brand is no longer as protected as it once was, unless you understand the impact that these mobile devices are enabling you and your customers to think about. So that's my hook. I also want to plant in your mind the idea that technology shifts and mobility are huge issues at the moment for travel brands, and how can they consider these technologies when they're engaging with their customers, and how will future technologies have even more of an impact? Because if we think mobile has been disruptive, just wait till voice and artificial intelligence comes along, because you haven't seen anything yet. So my first plot turn, where I basically talk about the challenges that travel providers are facing. So if you're an airline today, you're facing new competitors. They might be low-cost carriers. If you're a low-cost carrier, you might be facing high-speed rail. If you're a traditional hotel chain, you might be facing boutique hotels in different geographies. There's a changing distribution landscape with companies like Google increasingly involved in distributing content, commoditization of travel providers' products, legacy payment systems, variable or lack of brand loyalty, and increasing complexity as the traditional airlines unbundle their offerings. Millennials in particular are known to be brand fickle, meaning that they do not continue the brand loyalty that people with an older generation tend to, hence that call out. If you're an offline travel agency, you're facing new challenges as well. New competitors. There are online booking tools which either exist behind the firewall, which are called corporate booking tools, or they exist outside the firewall, and you can call those online travel agents. There are also competition for supplier.com. There are new intermediaries in this space, low margins, high cost base, rising complexity, manual payment systems with credit cards being passed around on post-it notes. I know it doesn't happen, but trust me, I've seen it. Again, low brand loyalty in this area and inconsistent travel experiences. And if you're an online travel agent, you historically were the disruptors of the industry, but even you now today are seeing greater complexity from new competitors. The likes of Uber and Airbnb that didn't even exist 5 years ago are becoming significant businesses. There is a new set of intermediaries in the meta search businesses, and if you're the biggest of the big, you've gone and bought your preferred metadata company to work with. There are low brand loyalty, increased complexity, and probably the biggest challenge for OTAs is the sheer amount of money they're investing into Google today. I hear that I think Expedia spent $5.6 billion with Google last year alone, which of course drives the cost of AdWords up continuously, which means Google is there rubbing their hands together and smiling very nicely. So here's the first pinch point. You're living in a different world, Mr. Travel Company. In the 80s, we all went to a store with our brochure, we circled some things, we took it back a week later, we booked our holiday or whatever it was. In the 90s, we saw the birth of the call center. The TMCs came to the forefront. You could call somebody up and do it all over the phone. In the noughties, we saw the internet phenomenon take off. And we saw the likes of Expedia and Booking come from nowhere to become huge players in the industry. And of course, in the teenage years of this millennium, we've seen mobile really come from the first iPhone just over 10 years ago to being such a huge influence on people's day-to-day lives now, not just in travel, but in our day-to-day lives in general. It's not just the travel industry that's being disrupted by mobile, it's many industries, whether you're in music, publishing, whether you're in traditional advertising, all of those industries are fighting for our attention, our hearts and minds that we give to these kind of devices. And there are winners and losers through this change. Now, you can choose to be a travel brand that sticks your head in the sand and pretends the industry isn't changing, pretends that mobile technologies and the new AI and voice recognition-based systems that are coming are going to not change your business. But there's a high possibility that customers will expect you to support these channels and support these new technologies as a hygiene factor of doing business in the coming years. Because it's not any longer a differentiator for you, it's actually what's considered just what you need to do to be there and deliver quality and value to your customers. So what we've done here is in the pinch point, we've planted a sort of idea in people's minds that this is a difficult situation that you're facing. What we want to do now is start to hint at what the answer to the problems might be. So travelers want relevant, personalized choices, and connected, frictionless experiences. Now, I'm not sure how that translates for the people in the back that are listening to me, and I'm trying to talk slowly and not get too passionate about it. But the way I like to describe what a connected, frictionless experience feels like is the use of Uber. Who in this room has used Uber? More than people that were admitting to using designer shoes, admittedly. Now, the point here is, if you've used Uber, you know that the payment is invisible. You can contact the driver if you leave something in the car. You've got all of your transactional history there for you to go back and send and share with colleagues and get expensed, etc., etc. Now compare that to the way most travel businesses work today. That's what we mean by connected, frictionless experience. It just so happens that Travelport is a business today that helps deliver these kind of experiences. We have a very successful mobile business, and we've created apps for the likes of EasyJet, Singapore Airlines, and others to help them deliver this sticky, connected customer experience, which is all about building brand loyalty and driving real revenues for the business. There's a McKinsey study that recently said a 5% increase in customer loyalty can drive as much as a 50% increase in profitability, because we're not having to pay to get customers to keep coming back. So we believe that technology and the evolving needs and expectations of the traveler will impact all the interactions between you and your customers. And Travelport used to just play in this search, shop, and book area. For those of you that know who Travelport is, we're a global distribution system. We compete with companies like Sabre and Amadeus historically, but in more recent years, we've made some deliberate changes to where we target ourselves. We bought a payments business. And when we bought the mobile business that I just spoke to, we also moved into pre-trip, traveling, post-trip, and evaluation phases of the customer journey. And so we believe that what's important is connecting up the customer journey in a way that delivers value to the customer. So here's the next pinch. Your brand, Mr. Travel Brand, is being disrupted by new players, new technology, and better experiences. And if you're a traditional TMC, you probably have customers using products like Concur today, and many customers think that they're now booking their travel with Concur. They may not know that you're behind that brand fulfilling it for them. So, there's a new connected borderless API economy, and it's changing the world and enabling modern platforms to disrupt. Now, what do I mean by an borderless API economy? Well, the first thing I mean is that it's borderless. Anybody that's been around for a little while has probably noticed the internet makes things pretty borderless these days. Yet the pricing models that half the industry is using would make you think that we're still getting those prices from punch cards that are going through things that aren't connected. Smart travel agents today use the pricing models of various companies to their benefit by maybe booking in a different starting city than the one that they may think of. Because actually, the pricing models maybe haven't kept up to date with where this borderless API economy has taken us. Secondly, of course, an API economy is related to the fact that in the past, people did everything. You had a person that would ticket, you had a person that would do something, a person would write out the email that said what the itinerary was. But in the future, services and APIs will replace more and more of the things that people do. And as AI comes along and as bots come along, we'll see this happen more and more. What this means is that APIs are becoming the predominant way that we connect up our businesses. Don't disagree? Well, if you're in the airline space today, there's a lot of conversations going on about NDC and how NDC and API connectivity in the airline space is going to change the models, change things in a different way. Travelport today is the first GDS that's actually NDC3 certified. Have to get that little plug in, please forgive me. But it shows how the world is moving towards an API-connected world. And what this means as well is that you can take the API from Google, you can take the API from Travelport, you can take the API from BA, you can take the API from Lufthansa, and you can combine those things together to do new things, like tell you when you need to leave your home to get to the airport based on traffic conditions, for example. So here we are. We've got to the climax of our story. This is the big bang moment for my Travelport story. We believe that the industry needs an open business-to-business for consumer platform where travelers and trips are the currency, not bookings and PNRs. We believe the old world is about global distribution systems, but the new world is about travel commerce platforms and retailing. The old world is about Edifact and switches, but the new world is about API connectivity. The old world is about segments and bookings, but the new world is about trips and maximizing the return on trip. The old world is about the PNR and the data that flows through the system, but the new world is about travelers and the insight and foresight that you can get using data effectively in your business. And like all good platform businesses, it's about easy in, easy out, and having consumer-ready content that just works. Because we believe at Travelport, when you have the right content, travel choice, delivered at speed, travel performance, that delivers a great booking experience, i.e. you can book at the end of the booking, backed up with travel intelligence, that's the sweet spot that drives conversion for people that need to convert in the industry. We're connecting travel choice through API connections. We deliver great value through rich content and branding and through relevant choices for the customers that work with us. We drive travel performance through improving the speed of our search algorithm and automating operations for agents that use our suite of solutions. And we accelerate success for the customers that work with us. We empower travel experiences, not only for the traveler through the mobile apps we deliver, but through the agents that work and use our solutions to empower the selling experience, to give them time back in their day to focus on the things that matter to them. And finally, we help deliver agency experiences through our suite of tools that are available. Cut through that. So delivering travel intelligence is the final pillar, where we use data and the resources that flow through the transactional engine that is Travelport to help give more insights to customers, to give them more data to help them make the right decisions around which markets to enter, which customer groups to target, and the like. So here's the resolution. This is the final stage in the storytelling technique. This is where we try and make people feel comfortable on the journey we've taken them through. So I started with a hook, which was about mobile. I took us through a series of problems that were the turns and pinch points. I talked about the area of how we were hinting at how the future might be better using mobile technologies. I took us to the climax of our story, which was about what we believed the industry needed. And then I get to the resolution, which is really saying that travel commerce and retailing platform focused on maximizing the return on trip for the travel supply chain. This is what Travelport are uniquely focused in today. And so I've given you today a whistle-top tour of storytelling. I hope you got something out of it. I clearly used the Travelport story to illustrate some of the capabilities. If you're interested in learning more about this technique, I would strongly recommend a book called Resonance by a lady called Nancy Durr. But also, as I said, there are many great TED Talks that talk about this technique in detail as well. So I would take a look at those if you want additional information. Thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you got something out of it. Thank you.